here's what happened. In the 1960s,
Yes.
we were at war with the Soviet Union, Cold War, and a little bit of hot war over in Southeast Asia. So we fear them because they put up Sputnik, which, by the way, people forget, was an emptied out casing of an intercontinental ballistic missile. And Sputnik it itself means fellow traveler, so it's all peaceful, but it was a ballistic missile head without explosives. So that was a signal, and we freaked in America. So NASA got founded on the fear factor of Sputnik. All right, so we then go to the moon on the fear factor that Russia will control high ground. Then we go to the moon, space enthusiasts say, oh, we're on the moon by 69, we'll be on Mars in another 10 years. They completely did not understand why we got to the moon in the first place. We were at war. Once we saw that Russia was not ready to land on the moon, we stopped going to the moon. That should not surprise anybody looking back on it. Meanwhile, however, that entire era galvanized the nation. Forget the war driver. It galvanized us all to dream about tomorrow, to think about the homes of tomorrow, cities of tomorrow, the food of tomorrow. Everything was future world, future land. The World's Fair. All of this was focused on enabling people to make tomorrow come. That was a cultural mindset the space program brought upon us. And we reaped the benefits of economic growth because you had people wanting to become scientists and engineers who are the people who enable tomorrow to exist today. And even if you're not a scientist or a technologist, you will value that activity. And that, in the 21st century, are the foundations of tomorrow's economies. And without it, we might as well just slide back to the cave, because that's where we're headed right now, broke. I'm tired of saying this, but I'll have to say it again. The NASA budget is 4/10 of 1 penny on a tax dollar. If I held up the tax dollar and I cut horizontally into it 4/10 of 1% of its width, it doesn't even get you into the ink. So I will not accept a statement that says we can't afford it. Do you realize that the $850 billion bank bailout, that sum of money is greater than the entire 50-year running budget of NASA? And so when someone says we don't have enough money for this space probe, I'm asking, no, it's not that you don't have enough money. It's that the distribution of money that you're spending is warped in some way, that you are removing the only thing that gives people something to dream about tomorrow. The home of tomorrow, the city of tomorrow, transportation of tomorrow. All that ended in the 1970s. After we stopped going to the moon, it all ended. We stopped dreaming. And so I worry that decisions that Congress makes doesn't factor in the consequences of those decisions on tomorrow. They're playing for the quarterly report, they're playing for the next election cycle, and that is mortgaging the actual future of this nation. Tomorrow's gone. If you double NASA's budget, right now it's a half a penny on a dollar, make it a penny. Go ahead, make it a penny. Go ahead, be bold. That would be enough to go to Mars soon with people and go back to the moon and on to asteroids. NASA, as best as I can judge, is a force of nature like none other. And so what worries me is that if you take away the manned program, a program which, if you advance frontiers, you make heroes are made. There's a force operating on the educational pipeline that will stimulate the formation of scientists, engineers, mathematicians, and technologists. You birth these people into society. They're the ones that make tomorrow come. A half a penny. That buys the space station, the space shuttles, all the NASA centers, the rovers, the Hubble telescope, all the astronauts, all of that. Nobody's dreaming about tomorrow anymore. The most powerful agency on the dreams of a nation is currently underfunded to do what it needs to be doing. And that's making dreams come true. How much would you pay for the universe?
Why is it that we don't seem to be able to adjust ourselves to the physical environment without destroying it? Why is it that in a way this culture represents in a unique fashion the law of diminishing returns? That our success is a failure? That we are building up, in other words, an enormous technological civilization which seems to promise the fulfillment of every wish almost at the touch of a button. And yet, as in so many fairy tales, when the wishes finally materialize, they're like fairy gold. They're not really material at all. In other words, so many of our products, our cars, our homes, our clothing, our food, it looks as if it were really the instant creation of pure thought. That is to say, it is thoroughly insubstantial, lacking in what the connoisseur of wine calls body. And in so many other ways, the riches that we produce are ephemeral. And as a result of that, we're frustrated. We're terribly frustrated. We feel that the only thing is to go on getting more and more. And as a result of that, the whole landscape begins to look like the nursery of a spoiled child who's got too many toys and is bored with them and throws them away as fast as he gets them, plays them for a few minutes. Also, we're dedicated to a tremendous war on the basic material dimensions of time and space. We want to obliterate their limitations. We want to get everything done as fast as possible. We want to convert the rhythms and the skills of work into cash, which indeed you can buy something with, but you can't eat it. And then rush home to get away from work and begin the real business of life, to enjoy ourselves. You know, for the vast majority of American families, what seems to be the real point of life, what you rush home to get to, is to watch an electronic reproduction of life. You can't touch it. It doesn't smell, and it has no taste. You might think that people getting home to the real point of life in a robust material culture would go home to a colossal banquet or an orgy of lovemaking or a riot of music and dancing. But nothing of the kind. It turns out to be this purely passive contemplation of a twittering screen. You see mile after mile of darkened houses with that little electronic screen flickering in the room. Everybody isolated, watching this thing, and thus in no real communion with each other at all. And this isolation of people into a private world of their own is really the creation of a mindless crowd. And so we don't get with each other, except for public expressions of getting rid of our hostility, like football or prize fighting. And even in the spectacles one sees on this television, it's perfectly proper to exhibit people slugging and slaying each other, but oh dear no, not people loving each other, except in a rather restrained way. One can only draw the conclusion that the assumption underlying this is that expressions of physical love are far more dangerous than expressions of physical hatred. And it seems to me that a culture that has that sort of assumption is basically crazy and devoted, unintentionally indeed, but nevertheless in fact devoted, not to survival, but to the actual destruction of life.
We live in a world of perpetual warfare and crime and corruption. Protest after protest, they continue to go perpetually. It seems that we need a different approach. How does the Venus Project approach this?
If you really wish to bring an end to war, poverty, hunger, and most crimes, what we have to do eventually through education is declare all of the Earth's resources as the common heritage of all the world's people. I see that as the only means. So this is what we have to strive toward. I don't say this can be accomplished in one swoop. It's a slow process of education.
Why do you propose such a radical change?
Well, I would like to see an end to war, poverty, unnecessary human suffering. And I can't see it within a monetary-based system. I see constant repeat of the same series of events: war, poverty, recession.
Is monetary economics at the root of the problem, and can it be fixed? If it can't be fixed, why not?
Frankly, within this system, in order to survive, you have to submit to the methods of this system. A lawyer is not out there to help you always. There's money in it for the law firm. In other words, the motivation is not what you would call based on human concern. It's based on the bottom line. The motivation in most industries, the bottom line is profit, not the betterment of humanity. And they would feel, well, that is a byproduct of this system. I don't believe that. It's that the rules of the game were invented so many years ago, they no longer fit the economic circumstances of the times. What we would like to do is update our system so that it fits the new technology.
Would the election of people with higher moral content solve the problem?
No, because even if you succeeded in electing people of unquestionable moral character, if we ran out of resources, there'd be lying, cheating, stealing, and artificialities. It isn't moral character that we need. It's the intelligent management of the Earth's resources. The real future depends on our ability to solve scarcity problems, overcome those problems through our own creative ingenuity.
What is a resource-based economy? And how does that compare with a monetary-based economy?
In a monetary-based economy, we use money as a medium of exchange. Now, money doesn't represent our capacity to produce. It just represents a method designed hundreds of years ago and established within the system. In the monetary-based system, it's wealth, property, and power. And that's the main directive. Now, today we say, how much will it cost? That is really the question. The real question is, do we have the resources to build that kind of project? Yes, we do. Do we have the money? No, we don't. But we have more than enough resources available to build anything we want to build. If you have difficulty with that, consider this. Suppose all the money in the world disappeared tomorrow morning. As long as there are farms, water, building material, we can build anything we want to build. It isn't money that people need. It's access to resources. In other words, it was necessary 100 years ago to use a monetary system for the distribution of products. Today, we have the technology to make those things available. What are we chiseling off each other for? A resource-based economic system does not use money, barter, trade, or any of the older systems that were prevalent. It's based on designing a culture that fits in with the carrying capacity of the world's resources. Anything else other than that will not work. It's like sending people to the moon without water and without food, operating on the assumption that the moon will provide. It has to be based, all science and technology must be based upon resources. And without resources, whatever planning you do, if you don't have the resources, is invalidated. So the resources must coincide with the industrial potential.
How does that offer a different approach to our society?
It would change the basic outlook of people. There would be no such thing as unemployment, no such thing as war, no police, no prisons, no banks, no money, but people would have access to new housing, education, health care, and all of the things we don't have access today without putting out a great deal of money.
If I read you correctly, you're talking about no money, no credit, no borrowing, no debt, no bartering. Where's the incentive?
No war, no territorial disputes, crime reduction by about 90%, the end of fear of economic deprivation or losing your home or illnesses which you cannot afford economically to take care of. all that comes to an end. If that isn't a good enough incentive, I don't know what is. A lot of people are brought up to believe that money is the driving force that generates incentive. It also generates incentive for corruption, embezzlement, taking care of your brother-in-law, unfair practices, racial discrimination. So I'm saying that yes, money does produce incentive, but it also produces all the other factors which are generally left out. I would say the people we remember in history are not the people that made a buck or made lots of money. They are people that have given their lives to benefit the lives of other people without financial gain. So I'm saying the real people that we admire are the people who did public works, not because of monetary incentive. I'm afraid of people that do things for money. I don't feel secure about it.
What about human nature?
I think that environment shapes values and behavior. Genetics, to a certain extent, set the propensity, but they do not give us a value system. Genetics is not responsible for greed, bigotry, racism, prejudice. All that is learned. So if you don't alter the condition that generates that, I don't see a solution. What the Venus Project advocates is the redesign of our culture so that those conditions no longer exist.
And what about scarcity? Can that be eliminated?
Do we have enough resources to satisfy the growing population in the world? Yes. Today we have more than enough. And it's incontestably proven that we have more than enough. It's just that the way we manage our resources are wasteful. We change the design of automobiles every year so that people will buy new cars. We change the spring fashion, the fall fashion, the winter fashion, so you will buy things and constantly be involved in purchasing things. So we will engineer, innovate, and make newer things designed not to wear out and break down.
What does the Venus Project represent?
One world working in one direction, the intelligent management of resources and upgrading the standard of living for all the world's people, with profits to none and service to everyone.
So how do you envision a transition into this type of system?
If you keep bringing in machines and replacing human beings, the majority of people throughout the world will not have the purchasing power to buy goods or services. This will bring an end to the old monetary system. I would see economic collapse as the only system that'll bring people around to say that, gee, I see that the people I've elected into political office are not competent enough to get us out of this problem, and they'll be looking for other possible alternatives. The more people know about it, the more likely that it may be installed. The Venus Project does not say this is what the future will be. All it says is this is what the future can be. And that is what the Venus Project has to offer. The methodology of how to achieve a higher standard of living for all the world's people without the creation of uniformity or standardization or subservience to an elite form that manages government.
What problems stand in the way of us implementing this type of transition?
Traditions, habits, indoctrination, propaganda. We are all propagandized to accept our system as the best system. We are all given stories about the culture, our cultural history, and which has left out the detrimental aspects. All societies tend to support the dominant values of that society. There's no such thing as an objective society. If there were, you couldn't have German scientists, American scientists, British scientists, Dutch scientists, French scientists working in serving their government. Real science has no allegiance to government. It only has allegiance to methodology. So this is not a loyalty to the fresco system or loyalty to the Venus Project. I'd be against that. You have loyalty to the earth and all the people that live on it.
Who decides what the future will be?
I don't think anyone ought to decide what the future will be, but we ought to decide where it is that we wish to go and what kind of world we wish to live in. And do we have the facilities and the resources to build such a world? The answer to that is yes, we do have the ability and the resources to build such a world. There is no way for you to make it on your own. Either we think globally or we perish individually. We welcome your criticism of the Venus Project. We welcome the participation of everybody and the contributions. We have no idea of what the ideal society would be, nor do we entertain such views as utopia. We feel that all systems will constantly change to whatever conditions are necessary to fit the needs of the times. We have no fixed blueprints, so we invite participation and we invite recommended changes, because the history of civilization is the story of change.
My goodness, don't you remember when you went first to school? You went to kindergarten. And in kindergarten, the idea was to push along so that you could get into first grade, and then push along so that you could get into second grade, third grade, and so on, going up and up. And then you went to high school, and this was a great transition in life. And now the pressure is being put on. You must get ahead. You must go up the grades and finally be good enough to get to college. And then when you get to college, you're still going step by step, up to the great moment in which you're ready to go out into the world. And then when you get out into this famous world, comes the struggle for success in profession or business. And again, there seems to be a ladder before you, something for which you're reaching all the time. And then, suddenly, when you're about 40 or 45 years old in the middle of life, you wake up one day and say, huh? I've arrived. And by Jove, I feel pretty much the same as I've always felt. In fact, I'm not so sure that I don't feel a little bit cheated. Because you see, you were fooled. You were always living for somewhere where you aren't. And while, as I said, it is of tremendous use for us to be able to look ahead in this way and to plan, there is no use planning for a future, which when you get to it and it becomes a present, you won't be there. You'll be living in some other future which hasn't yet arrived. And so in this way, one is never able actually to inherit and enjoy the fruits of one's action. You can't live at all unless you can live fully now.
If you awaken from this illusion and you understand that black implies white, self implies other, life implies death, or shall I say, death implies life, you can feel yourself not as a stranger in the world, not as something here on probation, not as something that has arrived here by fluke, but you can begin to feel your own existence as absolutely fundamental. I'm not trying to sell you on this idea in the sense of converting you to it. I want you to play with it. I want you to think of its possibilities. I'm not trying to prove it. I'm just putting it forward as a possibility of life to think about. So then, let's suppose that you were able every night to dream any dream you wanted to dream. And that you could, for example, have the power within one night to dream 75 years of time, or any length of time you wanted to have. And you would naturally, as you began on this adventure of dreams, you would fulfill all your wishes. You would have every kind of pleasure you could conceive. And after several nights of 75 years of total pleasure each, you would say, well, that was pretty great. But now let's have a surprise. Let's have a dream which isn't under control. Well, something is going to happen to me that I don't know what it's going to be. And you would dig that and come out of that and say, wow, that was a close shave, wasn't it? And then you would get more and more adventurous, and you would make further and further out gambles as to what you would dream. And finally, you would dream where you are now. You would dream the dream of living the life that you are actually living today. That would be within the infinite multiplicity of choices you would have, of playing that you weren't God. Because the whole nature of the Godhead, according to this idea, is to play that he's not. So in this idea then, everybody is fundamentally the ultimate reality. Not God in a politically kingly sense, but God in the sense of being the self, the deep down basic whatever there is. And you're all that, only you're pretending you're not.
So there's a great essay written by Sigmund Freud called On Transience, and in it he cites a conversation that he had with the poet Rilke as they were walking along this beautiful garden. And at one point, Rilke looked like he was about to tear up, and Freud said, "What's wrong? It's a beautiful day, there's beautiful plants around us, this is magnificent." And then Rilke says, "Well, I can't get over the fact that one day all of this is going to die. All these trees, all these plants, all this life is going to decay. Everything dissolves in meaninglessness when you think about the fact that impermanence is a really real thing. Perhaps the greatest existential bummer of all is entropy." And I was really struck by this because perhaps that's why when we're in love, we're also kind of sad. There's a sadness to the ecstasy, you know? Beautiful things sometimes can make us a little sad, and it's because what they hint at is the exception, a vision of something more, a vision of a hidden door, a rabbit hole to fall through, but a temporary one. And I think ultimately that is kind of the tragedy. That is why love simultaneously fills us with melancholy. So that's why sometimes I feel nostalgic over something I haven't lost yet, because I see its transience. And so how does one respond to this? Do we love harder? Do we squeeze tighter? Or do we embrace the Buddhist creed of no attachment? Do we pretend not to care that everything and everyone we know is going to be taken away from us? And I don't know if I can accept that. I think I more side with the Dylan Thomas quote that says, "I will not go quietly into that good night, but instead rage against the dying of the light." I think that we defy entropy and impermanence with our films and our poems. I think we hold onto each other a little harder and say, "I will not let go. I do not accept the ephemeral nature of this moment. I'm going to extend it forever." Or at least I'm going to try.